That was a wake-up call, and that was the last time I drank.
Luke Clark.
With me, Luke.
Luke Clark.
Growing up, I've always been a bit like, oh, this person might not like me. I've always sort of had a bit of imposter syndrome, so I used to drink to try and be a bit more outgoing, be a bit louder. I was on holiday at an all-inclusive, and I just drank, and I was on medication for my mental health at the time. I didn't realise this at the time. I was kind of like hallucinating, so I was seeing things that weren't there. I wandered off and slept in the bush outside the hotel.
You drank till you blacked out?
Yeah, literally. And the shock for me in that instance was the hotel was on a cliff, so I could have done anything and just not realised it. Walked into the hotel room the next day and was like, what happened?
Elliott Wald, addiction specialist. Coming clean with me.
Hello, I'm Elliott Wald, addiction specialist, and welcome to another episode of Coming Clean with Me. Here in the studios today with me is Luke Clark. Luke is the host of the podcast Stress Sessions, where he has guests ranging on topics of anxiety, depression, and all sorts of mental health issues. Luke is joining us today to talk about his alcohol dependency and his sobriety. Welcome, Luke. Thank you for coming. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks, mate. Not too bad, too bad.
Good. So, Luke, tell me about what it was like growing up as a child for you and where you grew up and what that was like for you.
Yeah, so I got brought up in quite a normal household, I think. I grew up in Kent, now living up here in Milton Keynes, so it's a little bit different, but not really. But yeah, it was quite a normal upbringing. I had two parents who were together. My parents split up for a year, which caused a little bit of that sort of mental ill health that I've had, that I've since found out about. I had a little sister, so I was sort of looking after her a little bit. And then went off to university. And after university,
what did you do at university, Luke?
I did journalism.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's it's sort of linked to what I do now with our podcast sort of thing. But yeah, relatively normal upbringing, and but then sort of found out as I grew up that isn't a traditional upbringing. So I know we're going to get into it probably a little bit in a minute, but the alcohol dependency side of it, my dad used to drink quite a lot when I was younger, and again, we'll come to it, I guess. But one of my aims in life was to not depend on alcohol like he did at some point. So, yeah, maybe to normal when I
not depend on alcohol or not drink.
Both. I
Okay,
think. Both.
Because there's a difference, right?
Yeah.
There are some people who can drink but are not alcohol dependent, and there are people who are alcohol dependent and therefore they cannot drink.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And how old were you when you first started drinking?
I was probably 16, 17. I, like probably most teenagers, used to have house parties and stuff like that, or go to house parties, get drunk, just try and have a good time. But then as we were able to get into clubs, started going clubbing when I was like probably late 16, 17. And it's one of those clubs where you had to have like a pass to get in. So if you knew somebody that was older than 18, you could get in pretty easily. So if they had an idea, you could get in. So I used to go clubbing then and started going out and getting drunk sort of from 16 years old onwards.
Okay. And what were the triggers for you? Now, what were the triggers that made you go drinking?
For me, I've always been quite reserved, and I struggle quite a lot in kind of lots of aspects of life with speaking in groups. I have social anxiety. It's not as bad anymore, but growing up, I've always been a bit like, oh, this person might not like me. I've always sort of had a bit of imposter syndrome. And for me, drink was an outlet. So I used to drink to try and be a bit more outgoing, be a bit louder, kind of like be a bit myself, if that makes sense.
Become braver and more the life and soul of the party.
This is it. Yeah.
So people would like you.
Yeah.
You wanted people to like you.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was, that you were looking for that need of people to like you?
I think because I didn't like myself. So it was one of those things where I didn't really know who I was growing up, and I don't know what I wanted to be or what I wanted to do, but I was never massively happy in my own skin. And that came across with like my parents. So I used to spend a lot of time doing my hair like most teenage boys do. But it got to the point where I was like, oh, if I look the way I do now, I can't go out. But then when I used to drink, I used to be like, oh, I don't really care as much about the way I look, so it's fine. So it's kind of a bit more to give myself a bit of positive boost when I was younger.
But then you become dependent on that feeling of having that positive boost. That's what happened, right?
Yeah. And in turn, you sort of rely on alcohol a little bit more. And when I went to university, that was the point where you're going out drinking every day. Yeah. So you're going out probably 5 nights a week. Students don't go out on weekends because it's too expensive. But Monday to Friday, you go out drinking, and it'd just be the norm. It just becomes something that you do every day.
You do it because everybody else does it.
Yeah.
And nobody sees it as a problem. So how frequently were you drinking? You were drinking every day at uni, but what about after uni? How frequently were you drinking then?
I'll probably say about still 5 times a week. And I've always been, up until the last couple of years, I've always been one of those people where I'll get in from work or finish work and be like, oh, do you know what? I've worked hard today. I'll have a beer. I'll have a few beers. Might turn into a whiskey, something like that. So I sort of reward myself with alcohol at the end of a working day most of the time.
Right.
And
I deserve it mentality.
This is it, yeah. And it got to that point with me, and it was in lockdown that when I started doing it, I used to log off my laptop and have a beer and be like, I've deserved this because I've worked really hard today.
Yeah.
And it went from there. And you sort of, for me, the trigger was, this is getting bad when you're day drinking at home by yourself, or when there's nobody else around you, because it's supposed to be a social thing. And it was for me for quite a long time. But when it got to that stage, I was a bit like, no, this isn't quite right.
I think I noticed with my patients, when you speak about lockdown, I certainly noticed a lot of people increased their addiction, whether it was the packet, whether it was alcohol. All of a sudden they were at home and they didn't have to get up. They didn't have things to do. There was nowhere to go. And therefore it was okay because I don't need to get up early tomorrow. I don't have to do this. There was no structure to their life. And I think certainly people who used previous, whether it's alcohol or drugs, that increased significantly during the lockdown. And for many people, when the lockdown came out, they then had this new pattern that they continued on with. Was that what happened with you?
I think so, yeah. And it was one of those things so I spoke about appearance and stuff like previously, and during lockdown you didn't really have to bother with your appearance, because like you said, you just get up out of bed, you put like shorts and t-shirt on, crack on with your day. You don't really have to go into work, wear a suit and all of that business. So it was a little bit easier to just get into a negative routine, I think. And that was part of, I think, my negative routine. But then alongside that came the podcast. So looking back on that now, the stress sessions was kind of born out of me going through that and going through that cycle of, oh, this is a bad sort of routine that I'm going through, but something else good came out at the same time.
You learned from it?
Yeah, I think I did.
And what were the negative consequences of your drinking?
Oh, there's a lot. It's a
you
lot.
Got time?
So I guess there's a few key ones. So I look back at photos now of myself and I'm a bit like, oh, that. I don't know how that was me. So one, it sounds ridiculous, but there's a photo of me on it, it's still on Instagram now, and I shaved my head for a charity during lockdown, for a mental health charity. And I was sitting there with a bottle of champagne in my living room during lockdown, just just basically swigging from the champagne bottle. And I'm like, that's not me anymore. It's really weird. So it's weird to look back at photos like that. But I think there's the two instances that stand out for me the most are I've told this story once before to friends, and my wife was like, you don't know the whole story because she was there at the time. But the first time I properly fucked up and with drinking, that sort of was the first stage of me stopping, was I was on holiday at an all-inclusive. I think it was in Corfu. And my wife and I just drank, went out like with some other people at the hotel. And I was on medication for my mental health at the time. And I have been for probably on and off 8-9 years now. And you're not, some medications, you're not meant to mix that with alcohol.
What medication were you taking?
I can't remember what it was at the time. I think it was sertraline.
Sertraline, so an antidepressant.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're taking an antidepressant to bring you down, and then you're using a depressant to take you further down.
This is it, yeah.
Right.
And it was, I can't remember a lot of the night, but based on what my wife's told me, it was, I shouted at her. I told her to piss off in more ways than one. I think, and again, I didn't realise this at the time. I was kind of like hallucinating, so I was seeing things that weren't there. I wandered off and slept in a bush outside the hotel. I literally fell asleep in a bush, woke up, walked into the hotel room the next day and was like, what happened? And my wife was like...
You drank till you blacked out?
Yeah, literally. Yeah. And the shock for me in that instance was the hotel was on a cliff, so I could have done anything and just not realised it.
Wow.
And that,
how long ago was this?
This was 4 or 5 years ago now.
And that wasn't your wake-up call?
No. There was one more time when I was like, this is it. And it was when I went out in Leighton Buzzard, so it's just down the road actually, like 15, 20 minutes down the road. And I went out with one of my friends and then some of her mates. And I don't know what it was, but somebody said something to me. I was a bit like, oh, that's made me feel really insecure. So my natural reaction to that is I'm going to drink more to try and put that sort of security jacket on. Yeah. And it sort of ended like that instance that I've talked about this, and I blacked out. I wandered off from the group, blacked out, fell asleep in a coral bookmaker's doorway, and continuously called my wife, who wasn't supposed to come pick me up, so I was supposed to be staying at my mate's house. She had to find me because I didn't tell her where I was. She was literally just driving around Leighton Buzzard trying to find me, and I was just passed out in the doorway, and I was a bit like, fuck, this is too much. Like, I can't be putting my wife, myself, my family through this all the time. And it was a bit like, that was a wake-up call, and that was the last time I drank that night.
That was the last time you drank?
That was the last time, yeah.
That was the straw, the final straw. Wow. How did it impact your wife and your family?
The drinking?
Yeah.
It's had a massively negative impact on myself and my wife's relationship over the years, and I've put her through some shit, like lots of shit, and she's probably saved me quite a few times from certain situations where I've like been passed out and she's helped me get home, or just got me out of sticky situations that I might have got myself into. And it's been bad. It's been bad in the past, but
it must take its toll on your relationship.
Yeah. And it's got to the point sometimes where we could have split up because I fucked up so badly. And
did your wife drink?
Very minimally. so it's she does drink from time to time, but she's never been a massive drinker. But I think that, I don't know if that comes into the, because she doesn't drink a lot, I can just go wild sort of thing and be like, oh, I can drink.
Oh, sorry, someone's going to look after me and make sure I get home.
Yeah. And it's been a bit like that for my whole life. I had my mate who won't mind me mentioning him, but when I was at school, he's my best mate still now, and he used to look after me when I was drunk back in the day. When I used to go out clubbing when I was 16, 17, he used to come out with me, and used to look after me. So I've always had that person that has looked after me whenever I've been out of it. And it just got to that point where I was like, I don't want to make myself this vulnerable anymore. Like, I'm getting quite old now, so I need to take responsibility of my own actions and be a better person.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere in the research that said something like, you drank to get drunk.
Yeah,
was that right?
Yeah, I'm not one of those people that, because a lot of people are happy with just going to the pub to have like 1 pint or 2 pints and just have a bit of a social. And for me, I couldn't ever really stop. It was a bit like, oh, I've had a couple now. What's the harm in having a few more? So most of the time, I'd go out and be like, oh, I'm just gonna get drunk, and I'll have a good time, and then not really think about the consequences.
It's interesting how you associate being drunk with having a good time.
Yeah.
It was like, it's exclusive.
I think a lot of people do though, don't they? I think a lot of people get drunk because they want to have that, I don't know, different outlook on life and
behave in a way that they can with having an excuse to behave that way.
Yeah. Let their hair down, so to speak.
And it's so socially acceptable.
Yeah, and this is it. And I've learned over the past couple of years since I stopped drinking that there's still that stigma there that when you drink you're boring, and it's
when you don't drink.
When you don't drink,
when you don't drink, you're boring. Yeah.
But
what do you say to people that say that to you?
I tell them in short terms the story of what happened in Corfu, and that I basically almost killed myself, and that's why I don't drink.
Yeah.
But I've had a few. I've not had it much actually, but a few circumstances. It's usually strangers that come up to you and go, "Why are you not drinking? Like, why are you drinking alcohol-free beer?" And it's a bit like, "Well, this is the reason." And I'll sort of tell them in short terms, like, this happened. They're like, "Oh, fair play, mate, fair play." So
it's interesting though, because you still put yourself in the situation where there is someone that can come up to you and ask you that question. You put yourself back in that environment. I know you're drinking zero alcohol-free beer, whatever you're drinking, but you have chosen to put yourself in that environment. A lot of people can't deal with that. How do you deal with that?
Know that I'm in control. And I think that the way I look at it is I like being around my friends. So for instance, I went on a stag do recently, and it's the first one I've been to since I started being sober. And I was like, fuck, this is going to be hard. Like, I'm going to be around a load of drunk people 24/7. They're going to be nagging me to drink, do shots, do pints, whatever. And I was like, this is going to be hard. But I knew that I wasn't going to drink. I was like, I've done this for over 2 years now. It's not going to happen. And knowing that I could take myself out of that situation and that environment of them being too much and drinking too much or whatever, I could remove myself from that situation, just go back to the hotel or go for a little walk or whatever, knowing that I'm in control of myself and in control of my actions. Whereas if I would have been drinking, I wouldn't have been. That's what really helps me through it. And it sounds weird, but like,
no, I get it.
There was the first evening I was there, 'cause it's in Prague. I saw somebody else was getting a bit bored, and it got hit about midnight, and we was in this Irish bar, and I was a bit like, oh, this guy's looking a bit bored. So I went, oh, do you want to go for a little walk, mate, just to like get a bit of fresh air? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, you don't want a beer anymore, do you? And he's like, nah, I've had enough. And I was like, we can go back to the hotel if you want. So we just walked back to the hotel in the end.
Nice.
And it was a bit like, it was so nice to be in control. And I don't know if like you've had this or anybody that's listening's had this, but when you're out drinking and somebody goes, oh, should we have another drink? And it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. You're like, yeah. And you're like rolled up to keep drinking. And to be in that situation where you can just stop and be like, oh, do you know what? I've had a good night. I'm bored now. I'm going to go home and have a sleep. It's nice. It sounds really weird, but it's a nice feeling.
Yeah, I get it. It's interesting that you're in this position now to put yourself in that situation and still be in control. Because when you mention the stag do, my best friend's getting married in August, funny enough, one of my best friends. And he had his stag do Friday, 2 weeks just gone. And there's like 10 boys, and like we've known each other for a long time. And like everybody I know really trains, and they're quite serious, but they're quite intense, and they're quite all or nothing. And some of them still use, and some of them drink. And they were saying like, oh, should we hire an Airbnb for the weekend? Like, and you can just imagine 9 or 10 fellas in a weekend in an Airbnb. You know what's going to happen. And I was just like, I was trying to diplomatically change where we're going to go. And in fact, we did end up going to Chinatown at the Dorchester in the West End. And we went there, had a meal, and then left. And it was so different to stag do's that I've been to in the past, but it was refreshing and nice. But I don't know if I could have put myself in that situation of a stag do, surrounded by everybody else. In my circuit, would have been using and drinking.
It was hard, and do you know what was really weird? So that because I've never used. I've never.
No, I know. It's just alcohol for you.
Yeah,
I don't say just, not just.
Yeah,
it's alcohol for you.
But in that same bar, the Irish bar that we were in, there was a bunch of lads doing coke on the table, literally just doing coke on the table.
I'd done that,
and I was like, I was proud of myself for being in that situation and being like,
and not using,
yeah,
and not drinking,
not doing anything. I was a bit like, this is really, because 3 years ago I couldn't have done it. I'd have not gone or drank. So to be in that situation, it's a real test. So like for me, I've had like, again, I don't know if you've had this, but I have milestones. So I've had like stag do, I've been to a wedding, like Christmases, like all these like birthday stuff, like occasions. You tick them off, and you're like, shit, I've done well to get through that situation.
Funerals, weddings, birthdays, Christmas, New Year's Eve's a big one, right?
Yeah.
How did you do with New Year's Eve?
It's a bit sad.
Really? You found it sad?
No, as in like I just keep it simple now. So like, you know, again, like back in the day, I'd go out, get hammered and like be with a big group of people. Now me and my wife went to the cinema and then chilled, had a alcohol-free Prosecco, stayed in, watched the fireworks on TV, and it's like, what a contrast, man. Like, I feel like a bit of a loser.
Hang on a minute. You feel like a loser, but let me ask you this question, and this question is going to be the telltale answer. How do you feel on New Year's Day now when you wake up? Amazing. So that loser actually is a winner.
Yeah.
Because New Year's Day would have been a write-off, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many New Year's days for me that was just lying in bed, feeling like shit, eating takeaways, managed to get on the sofa, staring at the telly, like, what the fuck?
It's nice to see New Year's Day now. Because like, in the past, it wouldn't have been a thing. You'd just been in bed all day, wouldn't you? And just been like, I'm going to just mong here.
So where's the loser? You're the winner.
Yeah.
So 3 years you've been sober now, is that right?
3 years in December.
Okay, 3 years in December. So when you first got sober, there must have been some challenges. What were the most challenging things that you had to deal with?
I think Christmas, because I stopped just before Christmas.
Just before.
So I think it was the 12th of December. So the lead up to Christmas, you have Christmas parties in the office, you go with your mates. Like traditionally, we would go with friends on Christmas Eve. So you go have Christmas Eve drinks. And then you go over to family members' house, have more drinks. And it's an alcohol-fueled sort of festive period, isn't it, most of the time? So that was really difficult.
Because it's such a short period after you stopped drinking that Christmas was.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And the most difficult thing for me to begin with was we went, I think it was on Christmas Day actually, we went around my auntie's house, and this was less than 2 weeks after I'd given up, so it's still in the very early stages. And I bought my first pack of alcohol-free Brewdogs, just a 4-pack, and I was like, right, I'm going to take these with me to my wife's auntie's house. And I felt so ashamed for bringing those beers, and it was like, looking back now, I'm like, oh, why did I feel like that? But I felt ashamed to I snuck them into the house.
What, you're not a real man unless you're drinking proper beer?
Yeah. I was like, I'm literally sneaking this 4-pack of alcohol-free beers in this house, pull it into their fridge, at the back, so nobody could see them. And my auntie's partner, my wife's auntie's partner spotted them, and he's like, oh, do you want, sat down at the table, he's like, oh, do you want one of your beers? And he didn't say anything, but he knew what I was doing. And I was like, just because he's not said anything to me about it, I was like, respect. That's
100%. That was the word that entered my head. 100%.
Yeah, and it's like, because he hasn't said anything, I'm like, oh, I can trust him. I can trust him with this. But that day was hard. So I was a bit like, everybody's drinking around you. There's wine coming out, there's Prosecco, champagne, there's beer, there's shots.
Having been through that such a short period of time after you got sober, what would you recommend to somebody else who's just got sober and it's coming to Christmas or another family thing? What's your strategy? What do you recommend for them to do?
The thing that I did that I think it worked for me, and I don't know if this will work for everybody because everybody's different. I think if you're trying to completely remove alcohol because you're an alcoholic, then you might not be able to do it, because the thing that I did was try and get all of the alcohol-free alternatives that match the drinks I like. So
are they good? Yeah, I mean, so for me personally, my issue was using the packet. Alcohol was something I didn't really do. Occasionally, I might neck a literally neat gin just to get to sleep at the end of the night. But alcohol was not really my thing. I was Pablo Escobar, but alcohol wasn't really my thing. And it was funny, I was in Spain only a couple of weeks ago with a friend of mine, and he's sober. I think he's sober about 10 years now. And he went and got some Guinness, I think it was, with a blue top there, the alcohol for 0. And I said to him, I said, what does that taste like? And he said, it tastes just like the same for me. And I said, okay. And he says, in fact, I have a can every morning before I go to work. And I was like, you have a can, I know it's alcohol free, but you have a can of beer before you go to work every day. He said, yeah, I'm an alcoholic. This is my solution. And I'm like, well, hats off to you. But it was like, have a can of beer every morning before you go to work.
I guess this will work for people though, isn't it? Because if he's doing that, but he's still not drinking alcohol, then that's fair play to him. Like if it's getting him by and it's keeping him from drinking still, then that's great.
And did you find that your family was very supportive when you finally got sober, just under 3 years ago now?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like my wife was very, very happy because she doesn't have to look after me anymore. Yeah, like my wife is amazing, and like she always has been, for looking after me, for supporting me through the sobriety stuff, and it's been a roller coaster because everybody's been really good about it, and I think because I was so upfront about it when I did it, apart from obviously the sneaking around with the beers at the beginning, because I was like talking about all of my socials and like just being really upfront with family and friends about it, they didn't ever really question it.
It's interesting you say everyone's been really good about it, which is great, right? But I'm wondering, is there something inside of you to say that question whether they were going to be, you doubted whether they were going to be as supportive and as good as they were?
Oh yeah, it could have been horrible. In my head, I would have, it would have been way more of a struggle for me had people been difficult about it. So I'd have been questioned on it, like, why are you not drinking? It like every instance, like I've gone down the pub to watch football, why are you not drinking? And just the thought of having to explain, this has happened like every 5 minutes, it's
tedious.
Fills you with dread. Yeah,
it's tedious. Yeah. Like I know that when people used to rack up a loan for me, and they were like, I'm like, I don't do that anymore. And you have to explain yourself to somebody else. And I know whether it's because that makes them feel a bit more comfortable if you do something with them, whether it's alcohol or drugs, that makes them feel a bit more comfortable. But, this is so you said very early on that you were very uncomfortable in a social environment, and alcohol helped ease that situation. So how is your social anxiety now in those environments now that you're sober?
I think a lot better. But I think that's because I've done other stuff to help that social anxiety.
Such as?
So,
excuse me. Go on. Sorry. Everyone listening, it sneezes. And no one undo gear. Go on.
Doing stuff like this. So I think for me, starting the Stress Sessions podcast was partly to get through the anxiety and depression of lockdown, but to help me be a more kind of positive, comfortable person, comfortable in my own skin, comfortable as me. And I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have done this like 5 years ago. I just couldn't have done it.
So you've grown.
I'd have bottled it. Yeah.
And now that you have no stimulant or alcohol, I should say, to help you in those situations, you're finding that you're developing the tools you need.
Yeah. And I think if I would have still been drinking, I would have nowhere near got as far as what I've done. I wouldn't be at this point now of, for instance, it was a couple of years ago now, it was in 2022, but I did 110 kilometre runs consecutively.
110 kilometre run. Okay, got it.
And that was when I wasn't drinking. If I'd been drinking, I'd have woke up hungover and been like, no, fuck this, I'm not going to run 10k today.
Yeah.
So it's just stuff like that, personal achievements, like running marathons, fitness, stuff like that.
You've done marathons?
Yeah.
Do you know, it's funny because I've got a podcast, it hasn't come out yet, and I think yours probably come out before it. The guy called Charlie Engel in America, and his was alcohol and drugs, and he got sober 31 years ago, and he runs a mile for every year he's been sober. So he runs an hour, beg your pardon, he runs a mile. Let me get it right. He runs a mile for every year he's been sober. He's been sober 31 years. So every year, this year he just ran 31 miles, right? So we're on this podcast and I say to him, 31 miles? Wow, that's impressive. And he said, when I broke my addiction to alcohol and the pack here, right? He said, I actually went and ran the Sahara Desert, 2 marathons a day, marathon in the morning, marathon in the evening for 120 days straight, 2 marathons a day for 120 days. And it's interesting how what he said to me was the pain that he put himself through was a reminder not to go back. Did you think that? Because when you're talking about the marathon and doing those runs, you're pushing yourself. You're pushing yourself to an extreme. Do you think that was beneficial to help you remain sober?
Yeah, I think so. Because I just wouldn't have been able to do it. I wouldn't have had the fitness, because to do that amount of running in that space of time, you have to have a certain amount of fitness. And I've said it to like friends and family. If I'd have woken up with a hangover or gone out for a drink like in the afternoon or something and hadn't run yet, I'd have just sacked it off. But just going out and just having that achievement. So like when I got to about 75 runs in, like day 75, and I was like, I'm struggling now. My legs are going a bit because this is tough. And bearing in mind, before that, I'd had COVID for 2 weeks, still ran through that. It was that really hot summer, so it's like, 35, 40 degrees in the UK, and I had COVID. I'd still ran through that, and I was like, fuck, if I'd have done this with a hangover, well, I wouldn't have done it. I'd have just been like, no, I'm not going out. So I think just knowing that I've done these runs and like done this achievement for myself, I raised money for charity at the same time as well. It felt amazing.
You know what I hear there, listening to that? I hear you learning to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's what you did during those runs. That's what you did when your legs were finished and you still carried on. You got comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that's what you need to do to deal with an addiction. You've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable with the fact you're not going to use it anymore, and there are going to be some challenging times. Do you find that your running was a good analogy, a good way of coping and dealing with being sober, your stress and situations like that?
Yeah, it's an outlet for my mental health problems. It always has been. Like I've used running for years and years, but I've only actually taken it seriously since I stopped drinking.
Right. Since you've been sober, what benefits have you found to your mental well-being and your financial stability, and what materialistic things that you have that you never had before?
So I obviously have like the saving of thousands of pints in a year, which is probably like what
did you spend in a year of drinking?
I don't know. I honestly couldn't tell you. It'd probably be in the thousands, which is saved because you don't have to have that anymore.
What led you to founding the stress sessions? Was that just purely through lockdown, as you say, and you decided to look for an outlet?
Yeah. It was that, and it was to boost myself in social situations. So it's like what you just said. So putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations, making yourself feel uncomfortable by speaking to people on a podcast that I might not necessarily have spoken to in my life. That scares the shit out of me. So I put myself in those situations to make myself better in them.
Yeah,
and that's why the stress sessions was born. There's that, and
So the whole concept of the actual title, stress session, is really, this is my stress session, interviewing you on my podcast and seeing how I cope with it.
Yeah, because every time I had a guest on, I was shitting myself. Like for the first two series, I was a bit like, "Oh, am I doing this myself? what am I doing?" So I was sitting there like waiting for them to come onto the camera and being like, "Shit, what am I doing?" But at the end of it, when you're a bit like, that chat was so worth the pain that I went through beforehand, thinking, "Oh, this bad thing could happen, this bad thing could happen." It's so worth it.
Yeah. Listen, I read a book by Jesse Itzler called Living with a SEAL, and it's something that you remind me of. So Jesse Itzler, Living with a SEAL, he hires a Navy SEAL, which turns out to be David Goggins. This is before David Goggins was famous. This is the book that kind of made him famous. So he hires this Navy SEAL because he wants to run an ultra marathon, which is 100 miles. And he hires him for, I don't know if it's 3 months or 6 months, I can't quite remember the period of time he hired him for David Goggins for. And one day he says to David Goggins says to Jesse Itzler, "I want you to sit in that chair." In fact, he says, "I want you to sit in that chair, motherfucker." He says, "I want you to sit in that chair, right, all night." So Jesse Itzler tells David Goggins, he goes, "I've got a perfectly good bed in there." He's like, "No, motherfucker, you sit in that chair all night." So there he is, Jesse Itzler, in this chair all night long, trying to sleep. Sleeps, wakes up, sleeps, wake up. Next morning he turns to David Goggins and he goes, I don't understand. Why did you want me to sleep in this chair being all uncomfortable all fucking night when I've got a beautiful bed in there and I've got an amazing place? He says, because your life is so comfortable. How do you deal with things that are challenges if you're not used to dealing with discomfort? And that's what he said. That's where I quote that line from, when he says, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And really, that's what you've done. You put yourself in a scenario where you knew you had social anxiety, where you knew you had anxiety period, where you felt kind of stressed, and then you developed a podcast where you could interview people and put yourself in a situation that you had to deal with and had to cope with without alcohol.
Without alcohol. To begin with, it was with alcohol. Right?
Really?
Yeah.
So that's how it started, with alcohol?
Yeah, so one of my first episodes was called The One with the Secret Whiskey.
The one with the secret whiskey.
And I literally sat there speaking to myself.
Wow.
I think it was episode 6 of the first series, yeah.
Is that what it was
I
like?
literally just had a glass of whiskey and I was like, this is me. And now I look back and I'm like, fuck, that was stupid, wasn't it?
But what was it like, the first podcast after you stopped drinking?
I can't remember what it was.
You don't remember?
No, I can't remember. Can't remember what it was. But I feel it's weird because you feel so much more comfortable in what you're saying. You're more level-headed. And you know that you're not going to fuck up because you've had a drink.
I think there's a lot less stigma with being sober nowadays than there used to be, for sure. Because there didn't used to be sober parties. There didn't used to be alcohol-free, beer, spirits, etc. Do you find that's easier for you now?
A lot easier, yeah. So I actually gave up drinking, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago, for 6 months, because I was training for a marathon, and it was the first time I'd ever done a marathon, so I was a bit like, I want to get a good time in this. And I didn't get the time I wanted, which is really annoying. But I didn't drink, so I gave up for about 6 months. And there was so little alcohol-free alternatives. There was literally nothing. I think there was 2 beers and maybe a wine, and that was about it. But they all tasted like shit. And there was no, as far as I was aware, there was no support network. There was no sort of Instagram groups or Facebook groups, or from what I was aware of, there was nothing. It was just me trying to not drink for 6 months. And now, when I stopped, I don't think you realise what there is out there until you stop drinking, that there is so many other people in that same situation that are trying to do the same thing for one reason or another. But there's a big group of them, and everybody's supporting each other, and they just want to be supportive and have a little network. And it's like I've been a part of so many different little networks on Instagram that it's been great. I've met some really great people for it.
That's good. That's good. And what advice would you give to someone else who is struggling with alcohol addiction or dependency?
I'd say it's not as simple as just saying just stop, is it? It's not.
You say whatever you want, Lou.
It's try something different. What's an alternative of drink or drugs that you could turn to that's a positive thing that can replace that addiction? And I'd say that's what I've tried to do with my life. I've done stuff that I have never ever done before because I now don't drink. I get joy in lots of other probably really simple little things that I've turned to because I've stopped drinking. So I think try and replace those things. If you're addicted, it's going to be a probably long, difficult road to giving up. But try something different. Find something that you really love and make that your addiction instead of the drink or drugs.
Exactly. Find something you're passionate about and become addicted to that thing you're passionate about. The gym, training, running, something like that, and get some help to deal with the addiction in the process. That's what I think the solution is. I really do. You've got to find the right help. And while you're finding the right help, you need to put structure in your life for sure. Luke, it's been a pleasure having you here. Coming clean with me. Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much, mate.
Pleasure.